Breath of the Wild was a phenomenal experience for me. A game that not only lived up to the hype that surrounded it, but exceeded it in every aspect. First announced in 2013, we had 4 long years to anticipate and salivate over this new entry into the beloved series. And when it finally arrived, it completely blew me away. The world and its beauty, the vastness of it, ancient and unknowable, and just waiting to be discovered. The cast of colourful characters I met along the way, rebuilding their lives with an air of positivity in spite of the tragic calamity that had befallen them. The scattered and hidden secrets of a time long past, urging me to venture off the road and become blissfully lost in the wilderness with nothing but the wind in the trees, the cries of the birds, and a few piano keys to keep me company. The realization that I could go anywhere. There was nothing off limits, no invisible walls or blocking geometry to pull me out of the moment and remind me that I was playing a video game in a constructed world. And the knowledge that there would be a reward waiting for me for reaching those far-flung islands or distant mountaintops. A nod to the fact that getting lost and allowing yourself to wander off the path laid out before you was the intention all along. It's a game that left a lasting impression, and so when, many years later, a sequel was announced for what had become one of my favourite games ever made, my hopes were high for an experience that would mirror that magical first play. As you've no doubt guessed from the title of the video, that didn't quite happen. But why is that? Why did a game that gave me more of what I loved, more adventure, more discovery, more things to see and do, more people to meet, places to go, things to collect, more everything, leave me feeling like it was no longer a place for me? The reason, as it turns out, doesn't actually have as much to do with the game as you might think. Let's talk about the real reason why I didn't like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Like many people, Ocarina of Time was my first experience with a Zelda game, and was one of the first 3D adventure games I ever played. I was transported. The world, the characters, the music, all blending together to create this ethereal, fairy tale-like quality. It was a world that felt as ominous as it did wondrous, filled with places and moments that provoked an emotional response. Fear, anxiety, hope, excitement, it was all here. Through its masterful use of sound, incorporation of music, and, for the time, jaw-dropping visual design, Ocarina of Time took hold of my emotions like nothing I had ever played before. Do you remember the feeling of entering Hyrule Field for the very first time? The music slowly trickles in, almost playfully, and then the instruments swell, shifting into an almost headstrong march backed by pattering drums before the trumpets kick in, ushering you into the next leg of what promises to be an adventure of a lifetime. Ugh, hook that shit to my veins! This wasn't just a game about levels and bosses. No, this was a place. This was a world, an experience, and I was in it. But I didn't go alone. I played through Ocarina of Time together with a friend during our first elective year of high school. A time fraught with uncertainty, discovery, fear, and the unknown. We'd head back to his place after school and crack our brains against the water temple instead of doing our homework, and stay up all night on sleepovers trying to track down every last Skulltula. Skulltula? Skulltula? I've never known how to pronounce that. Tarantula? Skulltula? It kind of makes sense, I suppose. Ocarina of Time, for me, was an experience shared with someone during a specific time in my life that elevated that experience beyond what the game had to offer on its own. Those memories kept it firmly held high amongst my favourite games of all time, and my number one favourite Zelda game for nearly 2 whole decades. In my mind, it triumphed again and again over all the subsequent titles that followed in its footsteps, despite those sequels arguably offering a better, more modern gameplay experience. Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and yes, even Skyward Sword. These were all fantastic games that I enjoyed a lot, but none of them ever held a candle to that experience of playing Ocarina of Time when I did, in the way that I did. That was until Breath of the Wild. Time is a funny thing. It's interesting to look back at the games you remember so fondly in your life, the ones that really made an impact and created memories that have stayed with you for years or even decades, and see how those experiences were influenced by the time in which you played them. What was going on for you then? What did life look like? Looking back at games I consider to be some of my favourites of all time, it's fascinating to see how it's actually so much more than just the game on its own that cemented itself into the annals of fond nostalgia for me. The truth is that it was never just about the game, but the circumstances in which those games were played. The events of my life that were happening at the time, and the way life looked, is always directly married to a game's experience. Was it a joyful, carefree time full of love and connection? Was it a time of discovery and new adventure, a time of standing on your own 2 feet and facing the unknown? Was it a depressing time, a time of hard truths, unearthed secrets and sad goodbyes? Was it a time when I just needed an escape, to go somewhere else and be someone else? Or was it a difficult, overwhelming time, a time when life got so crazy that all I wanted to do was just find a place to breathe? In my opinion, it's almost impossible to separate the two. The circumstances of our lives influence the games we play and the headspace in which we play them. They drive us to seek out specific types of experiences and pull us away from others. They push us to lean in and feel emotions we need to feel and work through in a safe space, or seek a counterbalance to the things that are spiraling outside of our control. I remember Ocarina of Time so fondly, not just because it was an amazing game, but because it mirrored the coming-of-age story I found myself in at the time I played it, and because I didn't undertake that journey alone. We faced, struggled, and conquered something together, my friend and I, and that was an experience we needed at that time, something that translated over to our real lives and, likewise, was in turn influenced by them. Breath of the Wild became so beloved to me, not because it's necessarily any better or worse than any other Zelda game I've played over the years, but because, like that first Zelda encounter, it too was an experience I had that was directly influenced by the time in my life in which I had it. This elevated that experience in my mind and my memory to even loftier heights than that of Ocarina of Time, though this time it was for very different reasons. I realise we're spending a lot of time talking about games that are not Tears of the Kingdom. And I get that, but I think it's important to explain why it is that I hold other titles in the series in such high regard, in order to really understand why Tears of the Kingdom fell so short of those heights for me. And if you haven't figured it out by now, it actually has very little to do with the game itself. I won't go into gritty details, but when Breath of the Wild launched, life had become incredibly tumultuous for me. For a long time, it felt like there was a new fire that needed putting out every single day. Things were chaotic and unstable, and I was craving something that could bring some measure of serenity and peace into my life. Something slow, without rules. Something where I could just go at my own pace and breathe in my surroundings. Breath of the Wild filled that need perfectly. Here was a game that understood the importance of knowing when to just be quiet. It's simultaneously a world of endless possibility, but also tranquility. It lets you breathe. Despite the trouble brewing in Hyrule Castle, there's a lack of urgency to the game that I really needed at the time. A lack of stress. One of my favourite things to do in Breath of the Wild was simply set my horse to follow the road at a slow trot. I think that simple piece of pathfinding really demonstrates the intention behind the game. It's genius. It's the game saying, hey, it's okay. I've got the wheel. Just take a moment for yourself and look around. I love it. I love climbing a mountain to be rewarded with an amazing sunset. I love standing and listening to the wind, watching it blow through the grass as insects hop and flutter around. And unlike Ocarina of Time, I actually really love the minimalist soundtrack. It's what makes the atmosphere and immersion of Breath of the Wild work so well. Bombastic Hyrule-filled trumpets are not what this game is about. This game is simply about being in and enjoying the moment. About losing yourself, about wandering with no destination in mind. When I played it nearly 7 years ago now, I found Breath of the Wild to be an almost meditative experience, and that perfectly balanced the realities of my life at the time, which in turn created an adventure and a place that I remember very, very fondly. Now, let's talk about Tears of the Kingdom. As I said, Tears of the Kingdom gives me more of everything. There's more game here than there was in Breath of the Wild in every conceivable way. You can't walk 10 meters without tripping over a hidden chest, a cave, a bokoblin base, an NPC, a chasm, a falling piece of Sky Island, a side quest, a main quest, a Korok, a shrine, a tower, Zonai shit, some gloom terror made of hands. And that's just in Hyrule. Tears of the Kingdom adds two more layers of the world to explore, each spanning and spread across an area the size of Hyrule itself. It might be the biggest open world game I've ever played, or that even exists at the moment, and I actually find it really overwhelming. See, therein lies the problem. There's an impressive amount of game here, and it all seems to be of a quality you've come to expect, which is an achievement in and of itself. You could pour hundreds and hundreds of hours into Tears of the Kingdom and never see everything it has to offer. This is a game that demands your time, and if you've got it, you will be handsomely rewarded for your investment. But time is a resource I find myself poorer and poorer in these days. Life has changed in the near 7 years since that magical play of Breath of the Wild. I had the time to invest into that world back then, and in return, it gifted me a peaceful, gentle place to explore. Unlike Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom does not know when to be quiet. Tears of the Kingdom is the opposite. It's loud. It calls to you constantly. Hey, look at this. Look at this. Wow, look here. Look at this. Hey, listen. I mean, Navi's not here, but I feel like this iteration of Hyrule would be her natural habitat. Rather than just being given the space to wander and explore and discover while you look around and enjoy the landscape, I find myself in Tears of the Kingdom with my nose to the ground, rapidly moving from one thing to the next, before eventually looking up and wondering where the fuck I am and what on earth I was supposed to be doing. It feels sacrilegious to say it, but I can feel the DNA of a Ubisoft open world game here. The map isn't cluttered with icons, but if you squint, you can almost see them. And right now, that's kind of how my life feels. Spinning too many plates, crossing off one checkbox after another, only to have more constantly piling up and piling up. Where Ocarina of Time was a transportive experience that reflected the way my life was looking in a positive, encouraging way, Tears of the Kingdom just kind of feels like more work, more stress, more of what I'm already buried in and burned out on. And right now, I just don't want any more of that. I think Tears of the Kingdom is an incredible achievement, and I do honestly, hand on heart, think that it's a really good game, an amazing game in fact, that deserves all the praise it gets. But it's just not a game for me. Maybe it will be one day, when life looks different again. And that's the thing. Just because a game isn't for you right now, doesn't mean that will always be the case. Things change. Life changes. It's why that game you remember being so great when you were young doesn't hold up when you try it again now. The game is the same, but you're not. Your life isn't. And that's okay. I think that's an important thing to remember when we find ourselves in these situations, where something you've anticipated doesn't live up to the memory you have of an experience from another time. It doesn't necessarily mean that the game is bad or broken, because it's not just about the game. It never was. It's also about you. What's going on for you now? What was going on for you back then? How did life look? How is life different? There's a reason nostalgia is so powerful. It's a vessel for not just the feeling of playing a game, but the memories around it. These experiences that we have and hold on to so dearly aren't created in a vacuum. They're a culmination of a wonderful game meshing in some way with a period of our lives that causes us to look back on those experiences fondly. It's an amalgamation that creates memories, and ultimately, isn't that why we play games in the first place? There's a lot of old games I wasn't interested in at the time that I'm loving discovering now, decades later. And equally, a lot of old games I used to love back then that when I revisit, I find are best relegated to the memory banks. And that's because I've changed. My life has changed, and it will again, and it will again after that. It's what we do as human beings. It's how life works. And for that reason, even though it's not for me right now, that's not to say that Tears of the Kingdom won't be for me forever. Maybe one day, like the old games I'm rediscovering now, it's an experience I'll find myself craving, an experience that meshes with my life, and there'll be a time then to create a wonderful new memory that I can look back on as fondly as any other adventure in Hyrule.